The UFC claims to house the greatest fighters on the planet. Their entire marketing machine is built on a single promise, that if you're the best, you're here. But that promise is a lie. There is a hidden list of humans so dangerous, so expensive, or so politically toxic that the UFC's leadership actually went to war to keep them out of the Octagon. From the Russian legend who brought a security detail to his own contract meeting, to the champion who was blackballed for years only to have Dana White secretly save his life later. Today, we investigate the UFC paradox of the outsider. We're looking at the 5 most dangerous humans the UFC refused to sign, and the dark, behind-the-scenes wrinkles that kept them from ever crossing that cage door. Welcome back to Crude Chronicles. Grab your tea, let's look at the ink that never dried. In the summer of 2009, Dana White did something he rarely does. He chased a fighter. He flew to a private island in Curacao to sit across from Fedor Emelianenko, a man who hadn't lost in nearly a decade. The UFC offered a massive deal, roughly $2 million guaranteed per fight, plus a share of the pay-per-view profits. It was the largest contract in MMA history at the time. But there was a catch that turned a business meeting into a security risk. Joe Rogan recently detailed that Fedor was controlled by what he called gangster-type characters, dangerous men who made unreasonable demands. The negotiations became so intense and confrontational that Dana White was forced to increase his personal security just to be in the same room as them. They didn't just want a stadium built in Russia, they wanted to own a piece of the entire UFC promotion. Because these rough men wouldn't budge on co-promotion, and the atmosphere had become genuinely threatening, Dana walked away. The greatest heavyweight of the era never stepped foot in the Octagon because the price was quite literally too high to survive. In 1993, the Gracie family wasn't just looking for a win, they were looking for a marketing miracle. Rickson Gracie was the family's bear, a man so physically dominant that even his father, Helio, reportedly feared him. But Rickson was never the face of UFC 1. The official story is that Rorion Gracie chose the smaller brother, Royce, to prove that jiu-jitsu worked for the everyman. But the darker reality was a toxic mix of ego and money. Art Davie, the UFC co-founder, later revealed that Rickson allegedly demanded $1 million to compete in the tournament, a price the bankrupt early UFC couldn't even dream of paying. Furthermore, a bitter rift had formed because Rickson had started poaching students from Rorion's academy to open his own. Rickson was effectively exiled from the project he helped build. To prove his danger was real, he later gave a Japanese challenger, Yoji Anjo, such a brutal behind-closed-doors beating that the footage has been locked in the Gracie vault for decades, never to be seen by the public. For 5 years, Ben Askren was the ghost of the UFC's welterweight division. He was an undefeated world champion, but Dana White's hatred for him was so visceral it became a meme. White famously told the media, "When Ambien can't sleep, it takes Ben Askren," and once said he'd rather watch flies mate than watch Askren fight. The UFC didn't just ignore Askren. They actively tried to bury his career by pressuring Bellator to release him, then refusing to sign him, essentially trapping him in a professional no-man's land. But here is the 2025 twist. Despite a decade of public insults, when Askren recently needed a life-saving double lung transplant, it was quietly revealed that Dana White was one of the first people to step up and help fund the surgery. The man White spent years blackballing was the same man he helped save behind the scenes, a paradox that proves in the UFC, business is never just business. Cris Cyborg didn't just fight opponents, she fought a corporate machine. From 2012 to 2016, she was arguably the most feared human being on the planet, but the UFC treated her like a villain in her own story. Dana White publicly mocked her appearance, calling her Vanderlei Silva in a dress, while Joe Rogan made graphic, derogatory jokes about her on his podcast. The strategy was clear: protect the Rousey dynasty at all costs. The UFC used Cyborg's 145-pound frame as a legal wall, refusing to create a featherweight division while simultaneously demanding she drop to a weight that her doctors said could kill her. The relationship got so petty that Cyborg eventually discovered she was blocked on Dana White's personal Instagram for years. When they finally signed her in 2017, the damage was done. The UFC had spent 5 years devaluing their own greatest asset, eventually leading to one of the messiest divorce departures in sports history. Gegard Mousasi is the man who exposed the UFC's fame versus skill problem. In 2017, Mousasi was on a 5-fight winning streak, having just dismantled a former champion. He was a top 5 lock, but a UFC lawyer reportedly told him to his face that he wasn't a big enough name to deserve a raise. The wrinkle that broke Mousasi? He found out that Sage Northcutt, a newcomer with 0 top 10 wins, was making nearly double his salary. Combined with the Reebok deal, which Mousasi claimed robbed him of hundreds of thousands in outside sponsorship money, he did the unthinkable. He walked away from a title shot. He became the first elite rebel to prove that a fighter could earn more and be more respected outside the UFC's walls. His exit signaled the start of the free agent era, where top-tier talent realized that being a UFC star didn't always mean having a UFC paycheck. At the end of the day, the UFC isn't just a fight promotion, it's a brand. And for every Fedor or Rickson Gracie who was deemed too expensive or too dangerous to sign, there is a paradox left behind. By refusing to work with these 5 legends, the UFC protected its image and its bottom line, but it also left a permanent stain on the history of the sport. We will never know if Fedor could have dethroned Brock Lesnar, or if Prime Rickson could have dominated the modern era. We are left with the stories of what happened behind closed doors, the security details, the secret donations, and the million-dollar demands. But the biggest question isn't why the UFC refused to sign them. It's which of these 5 would have been the undisputed GOAT if the ink had actually dried on the paper. Let me know who you think was the UFC's biggest missed opportunity in the comments. Paradox resolved. I'll see you in the next Chronicle.